First of all, I didn't say, and I wouldn't argue, that the reason for the crisis in the SWP is a question of sexism. I said the trigger. But I find it peculiar that in a discussion about the question of democracy, the concerns of 52% of the population are seen as a sort of side issue. And I actually think that we need to discuss questions of the organisation of the oppressed, questions of sexism, questions of racism, questions of other hierarchies of oppression within our movement much more, and that's at all levels of the movement. And these things are not somewhere over there when we're talking about what sort of society we might want to build, because otherwise it's not going to have very many people committed to it. And Tina, you're absolutely right, we need to win the majority of people to the support for the sort of society we want to build, but we can't do that unless we address their needs. And Barry, I absolutely agree with you, and I tried to talk about that in my contribution, that we have to learn from the mass movement, but I think that mass movement is quite diverse. You know, it's a movement that involves the trade unions, it's a mass movement that involves the movements of the oppressed, it's a movement that involves, that exists in struggles in the workplaces, it's a movement that involves struggles in communities against racism, or it's a very diverse thing, and I think we have to learn from that in a very creative way. And that's what I tried to talk about in terms of my experience, that I've learned from all sorts of individuals and groups of people, some of whom have had the same sort of ideological labels in their heads as me, and some of them haven't had any of them. And it doesn't, you know, I mean, I suppose in 35 years political activity, the time I learned fastest was when I was on a strike committee, because then the concentration of political activity is huge. But I think I took into that experience a lot of things that I'd learned outside, and I agree, and this proves, you know, my model of democratic centralism. I don't agree with Steve that action's the only thing. I agree with comrades who say that you have to bring those things together and move forward. I think that the difficulty about talking about the past is if people talk about the past in a way that says, I've read all these books and this is what happened and you must believe me, rather than I read this great book, I learned this from this, I'd encourage you to read it, or I watched this great film, or whatever it is. If it's about sharing the experience and encouraging other people to draw their own lessons, then I think that's educational. What's not educational, in my view, is telling people what lessons they should draw without going through that experience for themselves. And I think there's too much so-called education on the left, which isn't educational at all, and isn't very good pedagogy either, because people actually learn through debating things out for themselves much more effectively. We've all fallen asleep when we've been told things. It's not helpful. And finally, on the question of building a mass party, I mean, I think somebody, was it Nick just said it? I've lost my sense of time. I think this is the issue. We can debate out, and we need to debate out, what sort of mass party we need, because one of the things that concerns me is that I don't know, because I don't know everybody in the room, although I do know a depressing number of us. And I've known some of them for a rather long time. Hello, Don. But I suspect most people in this room to have come to this room would vote for one of Nick's initial theses when he said the crisis we're facing is not a crisis of neoliberalism, it's a fundamental crisis of capitalism. That's absolutely true. In my view, that's absolutely right. But the contradiction is that I don't think we can overcome that fundamental crisis of capitalism by only starting working with people who are already convinced of that. I.e., there's a bigger hinterland of people who think either it's a crisis of neoliberalism or think it's a crisis of my estate or my workplace, or, you know, don't have any of those labels for it. And therefore, for us, part of the question, I think, is how we do that. And from that point of view, I think, you know, I don't want to end on a question of disagreement, but I think when Tina talks about, you know, people hiding, I think that's to conflate two things. I mean, I think there are people who hide their politics, but I don't think unity on the basis of immediate demands is necessarily about hiding your politics. It can be about how on earth do we make a step forward from the disastrous place we are now to give people the confidence and the political space to actually have those broader strategic discussions.
Thank you.